You glance at the top corner of your screen. It says 5G, but more often than not, the actual speed you experience is nearly indistinguishable from the 4G network you used 5 years ago. The telecom industry sold a vision of self-driving vehicle fleets coordinating in real time and surgeons performing remote robotic operations from across the globe. What most users got was slightly less buffering on a streaming video. This gap between expectation and reality doesn't come from poorly written code or lazy engineering. We built a massive global infrastructure network, but the hardware slammed directly into the unbending laws of physics. Telecommunications companies keep bolting more antennas to existing cell towers, but the current radio wave technology has hit a hard physical ceiling that scaling up simply cannot fix. Standard low-frequency radio waves are resilient, punching through concrete structures without breaking a sweat, but they carry very limited data. High-frequency millimeter waves do the opposite. They pack massive clusters of data, but lose energy quickly, dying out over just 2 city blocks. They are so fragile that dense tree foliage or an average rainstorm acts like a concrete wall, stopping the high-capacity signal entirely. Standard radio physics forces a rigid compromise. You can have vast geographic coverage, or you can have enormous speed. Achieving both simultaneously through open air was considered theoretically impossible. To handle the modern spectrum, current cell towers require entirely separate electronic processing modules for low-band, mid-band, and millimeter wave frequencies, resulting in massive, power-hungry equipment racks. Researchers at Peking University and City University of Hong Kong approached the problem differently. They developed a silicon die measuring just 11 by 2 millimeters that effectively replaces that entire rack of hardware. This thin-film lithium niobate chip bypasses the radio bottleneck. It takes incoming standard radio signals and transforms them directly into optical light waves. Light carriers are unaffected by the attenuation bottlenecks that choke radio frequencies. Once the data is moving as light, the usual physical barriers no longer apply. Processing as light allows this single microscopic chip to handle 9 different frequency bands simultaneously across a 115 GHz range. It switches between them in under 200 microseconds, pushing speeds up to 100 gigabits per second. By converting radio into light, engineers bypassed the atmospheric physics wall, compressing the processing power of a full cellular tower down to a single component smaller than a pencil eraser. For decades, the spectrum between 100 GHz and 3 Terahertz was known in the telecom industry as the Terahertz gap. The frequencies here were simply too fragile for open-air use. Ordinary atmospheric humidity and dense water vapor act as physical barriers at these frequencies, absorbing and scattering the signal before it reaches a receiver. A joint team from Purple Mountain Laboratories, Fudan University, and China Mobile solved the power amplification and phase stability issues that caused this interference, pushing a stable transmission straight through ordinary air. They achieved an open-air transmission of 206.25 gigabits per second. Frequencies once considered an unusable graveyard are now holding steady at over 20 times the peak speed of standard 5G. These tests are no longer confined to highly controlled laboratory environments. They have scaled up into the live deployment of a major urban metropolis. In April 2026, the city of Nanjing launched an active pre-6G city trial, installing 16 integrated base stations. This footprint covers 50 kilometers of continuous urban and low-altitude space, along with an additional 27 kilometers of offshore maritime coverage. This network currently provides real-time, zero-latency flight control for autonomous drone swarms overhead, while simultaneously carrying live, buffering-free 3D volumetric video calls at street level. While international committees draft theoretical white papers for lab standards, this live hardware dictates the physical reality of one of the most heavily populated regions on Earth. The engineering milestones determine who builds the physical towers, but the underlying economics dictate who collects the global royalties. The shift to 6G is a strategic race to own the foundational standard specifications, and early 2026 saw international research investments cross the $20 billion mark. This table breaks down global patent distribution. As the data shows, Chinese entities hold 40.3% of all global 6G patents. This places one alliance ahead of every other international bloc, surpassing the US and Japan's 35% South Korea's 15.2, and Europe's 9.5. Holding the largest single portfolio of global 6G patents translates into critical leverage at the international negotiating table. It allows these organizations to define the technical requirements for the next decade, turning their specific hardware breakthroughs into the global mandatory standard. The finalization of these rules happens at the 2027 World Radio Communication Conference in Geneva, where global standards bodies will lock in the specifications. Massive deployment hurdles remain. Running terahertz waves requires dense networks of microtransmitters on almost every city block to bypass concrete and glass, placing enormous strain on regional power grids. But despite the logistical challenges, the negotiating power belongs to the nation arriving with custom photonic hardware already running on live city networks. The standards for the next decade of connectivity are being finalized today. The race was won by quietly solving microscopic physics problems, while the rest of the world waited for a 5G revolution that never arrived.